My mom started secretly poisoning me with peanuts when I was 7 to get my inheritance from grandma when she baked a cake with enough peanut flour to kill me. On my 17th birthday, I decided to switch all her insulin with saline and wait 17 minutes before calling the ambulance. My mother once gave me a vitamin that was really just a sugar med she had infused with peanuts. When my throat swelled up, she stared at me with the coldest smile, then administered the EpiPen just before it was too late, almost as if to tell me she could call me whenever she wanted. That's not the only thing she's done either. She blended tiny pieces of Snickers bars into my intra-workout smoothies, even drenched my retainers in peanut oil before my picture day. It started when I was 7, and she packed a peanut butter sandwich in my lunchbox, even though the school had my allergy on file. The nurse called her frantically while I wheezed on her office floor with hives spreading up my neck. My mother arrived at school 20 minutes later with that same blank expression she'd perfected over the years. That night, Dad mentioned something about Grandma's will during dinner, and Mom's jaw tightened in that specific way it did when money came up. Grandma had always favored me, and everyone knew it. After that came years of escalating accidents. She'd make Thai food with peanut sauce, claiming she forgot about my allergy. She'd buy candy bars with peanuts and leave them on my pillow as treats, then act shocked when I broke out in hives. Once she even rubbed peanut oil on my doorknob right before parent-teacher conferences. Dad worked nights at the hospital and never saw the pattern because Mom timed everything perfectly. She would even gaslight me afterward while stroking my hair and buy me expensive gifts like she was apologizing for something that wasn't her fault. The breaking point came after the week after my 17th birthday. Grandma had died 2 months earlier and left me everything in her will with Mom as a beneficiary until I turned 21. That's when Mom made her real move. She baked this gorgeous chocolate cake and insisted we celebrate just the two of us since Dad was working another double shift. She watched me take that first bite with this little smile, and I knew something was wrong before my throat even started closing. The cake was loaded with peanut flour, and this time she'd used enough to cull me. I barely made it to my EpiPen while she stood there watching. The paramedics said I was lucky to survive, and the ER doctor pulled me aside later to confirm the cake contained lethal amounts of peanuts. This wasn't an accident, she said quietly, but Mom had already gotten to the police with her tears and her reputation as the devoted mother of an allergic child. I spent 3 days in the hospital thinking about everything differently and decided I needed a plan. During visiting hours, I pretended to sleep while Mom sat beside my bed, and I heard her on the phone with her lawyer asking how soon the inheritance would transfer if something happened to me. That's when I remembered seeing her sneak into the hall closet sometimes and hearing the click of a glucose meter. She'd been hiding her diabetes for years because she thought chronic illness made people look weak. After discharge, I started volunteering at the hospital where Dad worked and learned the supply room schedules. Within a week, I had everything I needed, including a saline solution that looked exactly like insulin. Every morning, Mom would check her blood sugar in secret, then grab her insulin from behind the frozen peas where she thought no one would look. I started switching just one vial at first to test if she'd notice. She didn't. So over the next few days, I replaced more vials until her entire stash was nothing but saline solution that wouldn't do anything for her climbing blood sugar. The changes started small. On day 2, she kept rubbing her eyes during breakfast like she couldn't focus properly. By day 3, she was going to the bathroom every hour and downing glasses of water between each trip. I played the concerned daughter perfectly and asked if she felt all right. She waved me off with increasing irritation each time. Day 4 was when things accelerated. Her hands trembled so badly at dinner that she dropped her fork twice. The smell of acetone on her breath got stronger with each passing hour. She was too proud to admit anything was wrong, even as her body screamed for help. On day 5, I found her gripping the kitchen counter with white knuckles trying to stay upright. Her face was gray and sweat beaded on her forehead, even though the house was cold. She tried to speak, but the words came out slurred. When her knees buckled, I stepped back and watched her hit the tile floor. I counted out exactly 17 minutes before calling the ambulance. The paramedics burst through the door while I stood back with calculated concern painted across my face. They worked on Mom with practiced efficiency, checking her vitals and starting an IV while I answered their questions in a shaky voice. Her blood sugar was dangerously high, they confirmed, and she needed immediate hospitalization. I rode in the ambulance holding her hand and whispering reassurances she couldn't hear. At the hospital, doctors rushed her into the ICU while I filled out paperwork with trembling fingers. When they asked about her medical history, I mentioned I'd recently discovered she might have diabetes, but wasn't sure if she was treating it. The lie rolled off my tongue smoothly. Dad arrived within the hour, still in his scrubs from his shift upstairs, his face etched with confusion and worry. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of waiting room coffee and whispered doctor consultations. Mom drifted in and out of consciousness while her body fought to recover from diabetic ketoacidosis. I played my role perfectly, the devoted daughter who never left her mother's side. Dad squeezed my shoulder and praised my quick thinking in calling the ambulance. If only he knew I'd waited those 17 minutes, watching her writhe on the kitchen floor while the clock ticked. On the 4th day, Mom's eyes finally focused when she looked at me. The machines around her bed beeped steadily as she tried to speak through her dry throat. I gave her ice chips and watched recognition dawn in her eyes, followed quickly by something else. Suspicion. She knew her insulin should have prevented this, but she couldn't figure out how it had failed. Her fingers twitched toward me weakly before falling back to the bed. The doctors explained her condition to both of us like we were hearing it for the first time. Severe diabetic ketoacidosis brought on by untreated high blood sugar. They asked about her insulin regimen, and she croaked that she'd been taking it regularly. The endocrinologist frowned and ordered tests on her insulin vials from home. I volunteered to fetch them, knowing they'd find only saline solution, but Mom's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes burned into mine as she shook her head slightly. She didn't want me near her medication. Smart woman, but not smart enough. I'd already switched her backup supplies at her office and in her car during the chaos of her hospitalization. Every hiding spot I'd discovered over months of careful observation now contained harmless saline. She was trapped in her own web of secrecy. The hospital discharged her a week later with strict instructions for insulin management and blood sugar monitoring. She had no choice but to fill legitimate prescriptions under the watchful eye of medical professionals. Dad took time off work to help her recover, which meant she couldn't make any more attempts on my life without witnesses. I watched her frustration build as her carefully constructed plans crumbled. She tested me constantly those first weeks home, leaving peanut products in increasingly creative places, hoping to catch me off guard. I navigated navigated around each trap while maintaining my facade of ignorance. When she slipped peanut oil into my shampoo, I noticed the smell and secretly used Dad's instead. When she dusted my toothbrush with peanut powder, I had a spare hidden in my room. Each failed attempt made her more desperate and sloppy. The insulin situation tormented her. She knew something had happened to her supply, but couldn't prove it without admitting she'd been hiding her diabetes. She started checking her blood sugar obsessively, sometimes 4 or 5 times per hour. Dad grew concerned about her paranoid behavior, especially when she accused the pharmacy of tampering with her medication. The pharmacist showed test results proving the insulin was legitimate, which only made her more agitated. I began documenting everything in a journal hidden behind my bookshelf. Every trap she set, every suspicious meal, every calculating look she gave me when she thought I wasn't watching. The evidence mounted while she grew weaker from the stress of constant vigilance. Her perfect mother mask slipped more often, revealing glimpses of the monster underneath to others, besides just me. 3 months after her hospital stay, she made her boldest move yet. She convinced Dad to go to a medical conference for the weekend, leaving us alone. The moment his car left the driveway, her demeanor shifted. She prepared an elaborate dinner with multiple courses, each one potentially lethal to me. I recognized the game immediately. She wanted to force a confrontation. I sat across from her at the dining table while she served soup that smelled faintly of peanuts. She watched me with predatory focus as I lifted the spoon, then set it down and pushed the bowl away. Her lips curved into that familiar cold smile. We stared at each other in silence, both masks finally discarded. The pretense was exhausting for both of us. She leaned back and asked how long I'd known about her diabetes. I told her I'd found out months ago during one of my hospital volunteer shifts when I'd seen her picking up prescriptions. The lie was necessary to protect my real discovery. She nodded slowly, processing this information while her fingers drummed against the table. Then she asked the real question. I wonder what's going through the daughter's mind as she sits there counting those 17 minutes while her mother struggles on the floor. There's something deeply unsettling about the calm way she describes switching the insulin vials, like she's been planning this for a while now. How long had I been switching her insulin? I maintained eye contact and denied knowing anything about her insulin. She laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the quiet house. Of course I knew, she said. I was too smart not to have figured out her game, just like she'd raised me to be. The compliment felt like poison. She admitted she'd been testing my allergy tolerance since I was 7, small doses to build immunity that had failed spectacularly. The inheritance from Grandma had simply accelerated her timeline. The admission should have shocked me, but I'd suspected the truth for years. What surprised me was her candor. She explained that Grandma had always seen her as unworthy, had threatened to leave everything to me since I was born. The only way to secure what she deserved was through my death, but it had to look accidental. She'd spent a decade perfecting her method only to have me turn the tables. I asked why she was telling me this now. She smiled again and said we were at an impasse. She couldn't kill me without risking exposure, and I couldn't prove her attempts without implicating myself in the insulin switching. We were locked in mutual destruction, mother and daughter bound by shared secrets. Then she proposed something that chilled me more than any murder attempt. She suggested we work together. With my intelligence and her experience, we could accomplish far more as allies than enemies. The inheritance would be mine in 4 years anyway. Until then, we could find other targets, other opportunities. She'd teach me everything she knew about manipulation and careful planning. I could see the excitement in her eyes at the prospect of a protege. The offer hung between us like a loaded weapon. I understood the real trap now. If I refused, she'd find another way to eliminate me. If I accepted, I'd become like her, a monster wearing a human mask. She waited for my answer while the grandfather clock in the hallway marked each passing second. My mind raced through possibilities, searching for a third option she hadn't considered. I stood slowly and walked to the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of water. I set one in front of her and kept one for myself. Then I told her I needed time to think about her offer. She nodded, seemingly pleased by my measured response. We drank our water in silence while the weight of our conversation settled around us. Neither of us touched the poisoned soup. That night I lay awake planning my next move. Mom thought she'd boxed me in, but she'd made a crucial mistake. Her confession, while careful, had revealed more than she intended. She'd admitted to systematic attempted murder dating back a decade. All I needed was proof, and I knew exactly where to find it. Her meticulous nature would be her downfall. The next morning, I began my search while she attended her mandatory doctor's appointment. I found what I was looking for in her home office, hidden inside a hollowed-out medical textbook. A detailed journal documenting every dosage, every reaction, every failed attempt to build my immunity to peanuts. Her handwriting was neat and clinical, like a scientist recording experimental data. The subject just happened to be her daughter. I photographed every page with my phone and uploaded them to multiple cloud storage accounts. Then I carefully returned the journal to its hiding place. Evidence was only useful if deployed strategically. For now, I needed to maintain the stalemate while I planned my endgame. Mom returned home to find me doing homework at the kitchen table, seemingly unaware of what I'd discovered. The dance continued for another week. We ate meals together with careful politeness, each watching for signs of escalation. She monitored her blood sugar religiously, while I kept my EpiPen within reach at all times. Dad noticed the tension, but attributed it to teenage hormones and Mom's health scare. If only he knew the truth about the 2 predators living under his roof. I noticed Mom's behavior shifting in subtle ways over the following days. She stopped leaving obvious traps, and instead began watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. During breakfast, she would stir her coffee while studying my movements, tracking how I selected my food, and checked each item before eating. I pretended not to notice, maintaining my routine of careful inspection while appearing casual about it. One morning, I caught her rifling through my backpack while I showered. Through a crack in the bathroom door, I watched her examine my spare EpiPen, turning it over in her hands with clinical interest. She unscrewed the cap and peered at the mechanism before carefully replacing everything exactly as she'd found it. My heart hammered as I realized she was learning, adapting her strategy based on my defenses. The next escalation came through her cooking. She began preparing elaborate meals that required my presence in the kitchen, claiming she wanted to teach me family recipes before I left for college. I couldn't refuse without raising suspicion, so I stood beside her at the counter while she demonstrated knife techniques and seasoning methods. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but I noticed how she would brush against containers and utensils unnecessarily, contaminating surfaces in ways that seemed accidental. I developed a system of secret decontamination, wiping down everything with antibacterial wipes hidden in my pockets. When she asked me to taste test sauces, I would touch the spoon to my lips without actually consuming anything, then provide feedback based on smell alone. She watched these performances with barely concealed fascination, like a chess player studying an opponent's defensive patterns. Her health remained stable with proper insulin management, but I could see the rage building behind her carefully maintained facade. She started leaving medical pamphlets about diabetes around the house, passive-aggressive reminders of what I'd done. Dad would find them and express concern, which only fueled her frustration. She couldn't explain why the pamphlets upset her without revealing her secret. 2 weeks into our stalemate, she changed tactics entirely. Instead of trying to poison me, she began documenting my behavior in her own journal. I discovered this when I noticed her making notes after our interactions, quickly closing a leather-bound notebook whenever I entered a room. The hunter was building a profile of her prey, learning my patterns to find vulnerabilities. I responded by varying my routines, becoming unpredictable in small ways. I changed where I kept my emergency supplies, altered my eating schedule, and started carrying sealed snacks that I'd purchased myself. She noticed every change, her eyes tracking the differences with scientific precision. We were locked in an evolutionary arms race, each adaptation spurring counter-adaptation. The psychological toll manifested physically. I lost weight from the stress of constant vigilance, while Mom developed dark circles under her eyes from late nights spent planning. Dad commented on both changes during one of his rare dinners at home, suggesting we both needed rest. Mom and I exchanged a glance across the table, a moment of shared recognition that our war was destroying us both. She made her next move through technology. I found spyware on my laptop, cleverly hidden within a software update she'd insisted I install for security purposes. The program tracked my keystrokes and browsing history, searching for evidence of my activities. I left it in place but fed it false information, creating fake searches about boarding schools in other states and early admission college programs. Let her think I was planning to run. Her response was swift and brutal. She contacted my school counselor, expressing concern about my mental health and requesting meetings to discuss my troubling behavior. The counselor called me in, asking gentle questions about stress and family relationships. I played the part of a normal teenager dealing with college pressure, deflecting every probe while maintaining appropriate emotional responses. Mom had weaponized the system against me, but I'd learned from the master how to manipulate perceptions. The game intensified when she started recruiting allies. She invited her book club friends over more frequently, painting herself as the devoted mother struggling with a difficult teenager. I would overhear her crafting narratives about my rebellious phase and trust issues, laying groundwork for future character assassination if needed. Each friend became a potential witness to whatever story she might eventually need to tell. I countered by becoming the perfect daughter in public. I volunteered at Dad's hospital more often, building relationships with staff who knew our family. I helped elderly neighbors with groceries, tutored younger students, and maintained excellent grades. Every good deed was a defensive move, creating a reputation that would conflict with any negative narrative she might construct. The insulin issue remained our nuclear option, mutually assured destruction neither of us wanted to trigger. She couldn't accuse me without admitting her hidden condition, and I couldn't expose her murder attempts without revealing my own actions. We circled each other like wary predators, each holding weapons we dared not use. One evening, while Dad worked another late shift, she attempted a new form of psychological warfare. She prepared a meal using all my favorite foods from childhood, dishes she'd made before the poisoning began. The kitchen filled with nostalgic aromas that triggered memories of happier times when I'd trusted her completely. She set the table with our good china and lit candles, creating an atmosphere of warmth that felt like a trap. I sat down cautiously, inspecting each dish for signs of contamination. Everything appeared safe, but I knew better than to trust appearances. Mutual destruction as a bonding activity? Nothing says mother-daughter time quite like comparing notes on who tried to eliminate whom first. Forget scrapbooking. This family's into something far more creative with their quality time together. She watched me deliberate, a sad smile playing at her lips. The meal was clean, I realized, but that was the point. She wanted me to feel the weight of my suspicion, to mourn the relationship we'd destroyed. It was masterfully cruel. We ate in relative silence, the clink of silverware punctuating unspoken accusations. Halfway through dinner, she produced a photo album, flipping through pictures of my childhood. There I was at 5, face covered in birthday cake frosting. At 7, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. Before the first poisoning, before everything changed, her fingers lingered on each image, and I understood she was showing me what I'd lost by fighting back. I excused myself after dinner, retreating to my room to process the emotional manipulation. She'd found a way to hurt me without touching a single peanut, using memories as weapons. I spent the night reinforcing my mental defenses, reminding myself why I couldn't afford sentimentality. She'd tried to quell me, everything else was just noise. The next morning brought a new development. Mom announced she'd hired a cleaning service, claiming her health issues made household maintenance difficult. The real purpose became clear when I realized the cleaners would have access to my room, my hiding spots, my carefully maintained safe zones. She was outsourcing her surveillance, bringing in unknowing accomplices who could disturb my defenses under the guise of dusting. I adapted quickly, creating decoy hiding spots filled with harmless items while securing my real supplies in places no cleaner would think to look. Inside old textbooks, behind picture frames, in the battery compartment of unused electronics. Each location was chosen for its mundane appearance and ease of access in emergencies. The cleaners found nothing unusual, reporting back to Mom that my room was surprisingly tidy for a teenager. Her frustration grew more visible as her indirect methods failed. She started making mistakes, small slips in her perfect mother performance. Dad noticed her snapping at trivial things, saw her hands shake with suppressed rage during family dinners. He suggested couples counseling, worried about the stress of her diagnosis. She refused, claiming she just needed time to adjust. I watched her excuses pile up like kindling, knowing eventually something would spark a fire. The spark came from an unexpected source. Grandma's lawyer called about a routine matter regarding the estate, needing some signatures for tax purposes. Mom listened to the call with mounting tension, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. After hanging up, she stared at me with naked hatred before smoothing her expression back to neutral. The money remained her primary motivation, and every legal reminder twisted the knife of her failure. She escalated again within hours of that call. I found peanut oil fingerprints on my bedroom doorframe, applied with surgical precision to areas I'd normally touch without thinking. My toothbrush had been replaced with an identical one that reeked of peanut residue. My favorite jacket had been contaminated along the inner collar. She declared total war, abandoning subtlety for comprehensive assault. I responded with equal force. Using the hospital's resources, I printed educational materials about diabetes management and left them in strategic locations around the house. I programmed her phone to receive daily medication reminders, knowing she couldn't disable them without arousing bad suspicion. I replaced her hidden candy stash with sugar-free alternatives, each swap a reminder that I knew her secrets too. The house became a battlefield of invisible conflicts. We maintained perfect civility when Dad was home, but the moment he left, the pretense dropped. We would pass in hallways like duelists, each watching for signs of weakness. She tested doorknobs for tampering while I inspected every surface for contamination. Our home security system recorded 2 paranoid adversaries locked in perpetual surveillance. Mom tried to break the stalemate by suggesting family therapy, claiming we needed to address the distance between us. I recognized the trap immediately. A therapist would provide her with ammunition, professional opinions she could twist to her advantage. I agreed enthusiastically, knowing my apparent cooperation would frustrate her plans. During sessions, I played the role of a loving daughter concerned about her mother's health, deflecting every attempt to paint me as troubled or rebellious. The therapist, a well-meaning woman named Dr. Martinez, noticed the underlying tension but misattributed it to normal family stress. She suggested communication exercises and trust-building activities that became new arenas for our conflict. Mom would propose mother-daughter outings to restaurants, knowing I'd have to refuse or risk exposure to peanuts. I would suggest cooking classes together, watching her squirm at the thought of me near her food preparation. Between therapy sessions, our war continued through proxies. She befriended my teachers, volunteering for school events to monitor my activities. I cultivated relationships with her coworkers, occasionally dropping by her office with lunch and staying to chat. Every social connection became a potential asset or liability in our ongoing conflict. The physical evidence I'd photographed from her journal burned in my consciousness like a secret weapon. Several times I nearly used it, especially when her attempts grew bolder, but I held back, knowing that once deployed, there would be no return to our current detente. The threat of exposure was more powerful than the act itself, keeping her from escalating to truly dangerous levels. She must have sensed my restraint because her next move targeted my evidence directly. I came home from school to find my room subtly disturbed, items moved millimeters from their original positions. My phone was where I'd left it, but the screen had been wiped clean of fingerprints. She'd been searching for whatever leverage I held, trying to locate the source of my confidence. I'd anticipated this and kept everything digital, backed up across multiple cloud services under aliases she'd never connect to me. The physical journal remained in her office, untouched since my initial discovery. Let her search my room forever. She'd find nothing but the ordinary possessions of a 17-year-old girl preparing for college. Her failure to find evidence made her reckless. She began taking bigger risks, leaving peanut traces in places Dad might notice. I had to work harder to protect both of us from discovery, cleaning up her messes to maintain our mutual secrecy. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now protecting my would-be killer to protect myself. One afternoon, while organizing college applications at the kitchen table, I noticed her watching from the doorway with an unreadable expression. She approached slowly, sitting across from me with careful movements. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of our conflict filling the space between us. Then she asked which schools I was considering, her voice neutral but tinged with something I couldn't identify. I listed several options, all notably far from home. Her jaw tightened at each name, recognizing my intention to put distance between us. She asked about my plans for holidays and summers, probing to understand how permanent my escape would be. I kept my answers vague, non-committal, maintaining the uncertainty that had become our default state. The conversation shifted when she mentioned the inheritance again, wondering aloud if I'd considered how to manage such wealth at a young age. I recognized the probe for what it was, an attempt to gauge my timeline for accessing the money. I responded with questions about financial advisors and investment strategies, playing the naive teenager who hadn't fully grasped the implications. Her frustration at my apparent ignorance was palpable. As senior year progressed, our conflict evolved into something almost ritualistic. Morning inspections, afternoon surveillance, evening preparations for the next day's battles. We developed a twisted routine that provided structure to our mutual destruction. Even Dad noticed the strange synchronicity of our movements, joking that we'd become like synchronized swimmers in our daily patterns. The joke hit closer to truth than he realized. We'd become so attuned to each other's strategies that we could predict moves days in advance. She knew I'd check any food she prepared, so she stopped cooking for me entirely. I knew she'd contaminate shared spaces, so I created clean zones she couldn't access. Our house divided into territories marked by invisible boundaries only we could see. Winter arrived with a new complication. Mom's diabetes grew harder to control despite proper medication, the stress of our conflict affecting her body in ways she couldn't hide. Dad insisted on taking her to specialists, worried about her deteriorating condition. I watched her struggle with the irony that her attempts to cull me were literally culling her, each spike in blood sugar a consequence of sustained rage. She blamed me silently across dinner tables and waiting rooms, her eyes promising retribution for every needle stick and dietary restriction. I met her gaze steadily, refusing to show guilt for defending myself. We were both victims and perpetrators now, locked in a cycle of mutual harm that neither could break without destroying ourselves. The college acceptance letters began arriving in spring, each one a potential escape route from our toxic dance. Mom intercepted them when possible, steaming open envelopes to learn my options before I did. I let her violate my privacy, knowing the information would torment her more than surprise me. Every acceptance was a countdown to her loss of control, a ticking clock toward my freedom and her failure. She made one last desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. Photo albums during dinner strikes me as oddly calculated. Who brings out childhood pictures while eating unless they're trying to make a point? The timing feels too perfect, especially right after she's been so careful about the food being clean. During a particularly vulnerable moment, she broke down crying, confessing her fear of losing me to college. The performance was flawless, tears streaming down her face as she spoke of empty nest syndrome and maternal love. For a brief moment, I almost believed her. Then I noticed the way her hand drifted toward my water glass, fingers twitching with muscle memory of poisoning. I comforted her with hollow words, playing my part in the charade while maintaining careful distance from anything she might have contaminated. We embraced stiffly, each feeling for weapons the other might have concealed. The hug lasted exactly 3 seconds before we pulled apart, both unsatisfied with the interaction's outcome. That night, I made my decision about college, choosing the school farthest from home with the best campus security. The acceptance packet included information about their comprehensive allergy protocols and medical support services. I filled out forms detailing my peanut allergy with exhaustive thoroughness, creating official documentation that would protect me in my new environment. Mom found the papers while snooping through my backpack, her face cycling through emotions as she read. Rage rage at my escape plans, frustration at the medical protections I'd arranged, and something that might have been grief for the daughter she'd lost to her own greed. She left the papers exactly as she'd found them, but I knew she'd photographed every page, searching for weaknesses in my defensive strategy. As graduation approached, our war entered its final phase. She couldn't kill me without losing access to the inheritance entirely, and I couldn't expose her without implicating myself in attempted murder. We were deadlocked by mutual assured destruction, two chess players staring at a board where every move led to stalemate. The tension affected everyone around us. Dad grew increasingly concerned about the stress we both exhibited, pushing harder for family counseling and medical interventions. Teachers noticed my hypervigilance and Mom's erratic behavior at school events. Even the therapist began to suspect something deeper than normal family dysfunction, though she couldn't quite identify the source. I spent my final weeks at home preparing for permanent departure. Every possession was carefully cleaned and packed, free from contamination. I created detailed medical files to take with me, documenting my allergy and treatment history. Most importantly, I secured all evidence of Mom's attempts in encrypted digital formats, insurance against future attacks. She watched these preparations with growing desperation, realizing her window of opportunity was closing. The inheritance would remain in her control for 4 more years, but her ability to eliminate me would vanish once I left home. I could see her calculating scenarios, weighing risks against rewards, searching for one last perfect opportunity that never came. Our final family dinner before my departure was a masterpiece of tension disguised as celebration. Dad had requested time off to mark the occasion, his presence ensuring Mom's good behavior. She'd prepared all my childhood favorites, each dish a reminder of happier times before the poisoning began. I ate carefully, tasting everything to avoid suspicion while consuming almost nothing. The conversation flowed around safe topics like dorm arrangements and class schedules, but Mom and I conducted a silent dialogue through glances and gestures. Her fingers traced patterns on the tablecloth that looked random, but spelled out threats in our private language. I responded with subtle shifts in posture that conveyed my own warnings about the evidence I carried. After dinner, she suggested a mother-daughter walk around the neighborhood, one last bonding moment before I left. Dad encouraged it, oblivious to the danger of us being alone together. I agreed, curious about her final gambit. We walked in silence initially, the suburban streets providing a neutral battlefield for our last encounter as cohabitants. She spoke first, voice carefully modulated to sound maternal rather than menacing. She told me she knew what I'd done with her insulin, admitted she'd suspected from the beginning, but had hoped she was wrong. I neither confirmed nor denied, maintaining the plausible deniability that had protected me for months. She continued, acknowledging the stalemate between us with something approaching respect. The admission shifted something in our dynamic. We weren't mother and daughter anymore, hadn't been since that first poisoned sandwich when I was 7. We were adversaries who happened to share DNA, locked in a conflict that had shaped us both into survivors. She taught me through cruelty how to be cruel in return, created her own nemesis through systematic attempted murder. As we circled back toward home, she made one final offer. She would stop trying to kill me if I would sign papers legally refusing any portion of Grandma's inheritance. The money would be hers free and clear, and I would be free from her attention. It was a business proposition stripped of all pretense, predator negotiating with prey that had grown teeth. I pretended to consider it as we walked, weighing options I'd already decided. The inheritance meant nothing to me compared to my life, but giving her what she wanted felt like losing. More importantly, I knew her promises were worthless. Even with legal documents, she'd always see me as a threat to eliminate. The only safety lay in maintaining our mutual assured destruction. I declined politely, explaining that Grandma had wanted me to have that money, and I intended to honor her wishes. Mom's face hardened at the rejection, but she nodded as if she'd expected nothing else. We completed our walk in silence, two generals acknowledging that the war would continue, despite geographical distance. The morning of my departure arrived with unusual calm. Mom helped load my car with practiced efficiency, checking each box and bag with the thoroughness of someone who knew how to hide contaminants. I let her inspect everything, knowing I'd already secured my important items. The performance was for Dad's benefit, maintaining the illusion of a normal family sending their child to college. She hugged me goodbye at the curb, whispering a final warning disguised as maternal advice. I whispered back my own warning about the evidence I'd preserved, the digital insurance policy that would survive any attempt to silence me. We pulled apart with identical smiles, both knowing this wasn't an ending, but a tactical retreat. As I drove away, I watched her shrink in the rearview mirror, standing perfectly still on our suburban street. The woman who'd tried to kill me for over a decade, who'd made me into someone capable of poisoning her in return. My mother, my enemy, my teacher in the dark arts of survival. The highway stretched ahead, leading to a future where I'd always check my food, and she'd always check her blood sugar. We'd carried the scars of our war forever, two damaged people who'd learned too well how to hurt each other. But for now, there was distance. For now, there was safety. For now, I could breathe without fearing the air contained peanut dust meant to cull me. I'd survived 17 years of her best efforts. College would be easy by comparison. The campus tour guide's voice faded into background noise as I scanned every food station in the dining hall, mentally cataloging safe zones and contamination risks. 3,000 miles from home meant nothing if Mom found ways to reach me here. I'd already caught her name on the parent volunteer list for freshman orientation weekend. My roommate unpacked while I secured my EpiPens in strategic locations around our shared space. She noticed my hypervigilance but attributed it to normal freshman nerves. I let her believe that comfortable lie while installing a lock on my personal mini fridge and checking the seals on my food containers. The first care package arrived 2 weeks into the semester. Mom's handwriting on the label made my stomach clench. Inside, homemade cookies nestled between layers of tissue paper, each one potentially lethal. I photographed everything before disposing of the entire box in the dumpster behind my dorm. The cookies tested positive for peanut oil when I ran them through the chemistry lab's allergen detection kit I'd borrowed under false pretenses. Her next attempt came through the university's meal plan system. She'd somehow gained access to my dining account and pre-ordered special meals for me, claiming dietary restrictions that would have exposed me to cross-contamination. I discovered this when the dining staff tried to serve me a Thai-inspired dish that reeked of peanut sauce. The manager showed me the order form with Mom's forged signature authorizing the change. I switched to cooking my own meals exclusively, turning my dorm room into a fortress of safe food preparation. My roommate moved out after 3 weeks, uncomfortable with what she called my paranoid behavior. The RA assigned me a single room, concerned about my obvious anxiety, but unaware of its source. Dad called weekly, his voice strained with worry about the growing distance between Mom and me. He mentioned her depression, her obsessive checking of my social media, her refusal to redecorate my old room. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while documenting each conversation, building evidence of her continued fixation. The insulin situation remained my nuclear option, but I monitored her health through Dad's updates. Her blood sugar control had stabilized with proper medication, though he mentioned she'd developed an almost compulsive need to check her levels. She'd installed glucose monitors throughout the house, even one in her car. The fear I'd instilled had become her prison. October brought an unexpected escalation. Mom enrolled in a continuing education course at my university, claiming she wanted to finish the degree she'd abandoned when I was born. Her mom signing up for classes at the same school takes helicopter parenting to spy satellite levels. Guess 3,000 miles wasn't quite enough space for someone who treats care packages like guided missiles with cookies inside. The real purpose became clear when I spotted her outside my organic chemistry lecture, pretending to study a campus map. She'd driven across the country to maintain her surveillance. I altered my routines immediately, taking different routes to class and studying in obscure corners of the library. She adapted just as quickly, appearing at the coffee shop where I worked part-time, ordering drinks with complicated modifications that kept her lingering near the counter. My manager noticed the strange woman who came in daily, but never seemed satisfied with her order. The game of cat and mouse intensified when she rented an apartment 2 blocks from campus. Dad thought she was having a midlife crisis, pursuing her education while dealing with empty nest syndrome. He had no idea she'd established a base of operations for her continued campaign. I found peanut oil fingerprints on my dorm room door handle and mysterious allergen exposure warnings in my student email that traced back to spoofed IP addresses. I responded by filing documentation with the university's disability services, creating an official paper trail of my severe allergy and the accommodations required. The staff took my concerns seriously, implementing protocols that made it harder for Mom to interfere with my meals or living space. Every protective measure I established became another obstacle for her to overcome. She tried recruiting allies among the faculty, volunteering for committees, and ingratiating herself with professors in my major. I watched her performance from afar, the devoted mother pursuing her own dreams while supporting her daughter's education. The mask never slipped in public, but I saw the calculation in her eyes when our paths crossed on campus. Winter break approached with mounting dread. Dad expected me home for the holidays, unable to understand why I'd applied for a research position that would keep me on campus through December. Mom's texts grew increasingly manipulative, alternating between guilt trips about missing family traditions and thinly veiled threats about my obligations to the family. I spent Thanksgiving in my dorm room, eating safely packaged meals while video chatting with Dad. Mom appeared in the background, her face a mask of maternal concern that didn't reach her eyes. She asked about my health, my grades, my friends, each question probing for weaknesses in my defenses. I provided vague responses that revealed nothing useful. The research position provided legitimate cover for avoiding Christmas at home. I threw myself into the work, spending long hours in the lab where Mom couldn't follow without raising suspicions. My professor commented on my dedication, unaware that academic success had become secondary to survival. Mom's frustration manifested in increasingly desperate attempts to regain control. She contacted the financial aid office, trying to leverage her position as a parent to access my records. She showed up at my work with complicated orders designed to force extended interactions. She even attempted to join the same study groups, claiming she needed help with courses we happened to share. Each failure made her sloppier. Other students began noticing the older woman who seemed obsessed with following a particular freshman. My chemistry lab partner mentioned the creepy lady who always sat behind us in lecture. The resident advisors started documenting her frequent visits to my dorm, noting that I never seemed happy to see my own mother. Spring semester brought a shift in dynamics. Mom's health began deteriorating again, the stress of maintaining her campaign across the country taking its toll. Dad called with updates about her erratic behavior, her paranoid accusations that someone was tampering with her medication, her refusal to see specialists who might help. I listened with carefully calibrated concern, never revealing my role in her paranoia. She made one last dramatic attempt during spring break. I'd stayed on campus again, but she cornered me outside the library, her appearance haggard from months of obsessive pursuit. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength, her fingers digging in as she hissed accusations about the insulin, the inheritance, my ungrateful betrayal of everything she'd done for me. Security cameras captured the entire confrontation. I didn't struggle or argue, simply stood there while she ranted about her sacrifices, her rights as a mother, her plans that I'd ruin. Campus security intervened when other students reported the disturbance. They gently separated us, escorting her off campus with a warning about harassment. The incident created an official record. The university implemented a no-contact order, banning Mom from campus property and university events. She raged about the injustice to Dad, spinning stories about misunderstandings and overreactions, but the security footage told a different story. For the first time, others saw glimpses of the monster I'd known for years. Dad flew out alone for my freshman year final exams, his face etched with confusion and worry. Over coffee at a shop Mom had been banned from, he asked careful questions about our relationship, about what had really happened. I maintained my careful balance of truth and omission, revealing just enough to justify my distance without exposing the full horror of our mutual destruction. Summer arrived with new challenges. I'd secured an internship in another state, adding more distance between us. Mom's attempts to follow were thwarted by the no-contact order and her increasingly fragile health. Dad reported she'd been hospitalized twice for blood sugar crises, her obsessive monitoring paradoxically making her condition worse. The inheritance remained frozen in legal limbo, Mom unable to access money that required my cooperation to release. Grandma's lawyer sent periodic updates about tax obligations and investment performance, each communication a reminder of what Mom had failed to steal. I ignored her attempts to communicate through lawyers, maintaining the stalemate that protected us both. My sophomore year began with news that Mom had been admitted to a psychiatric facility. The official diagnosis was severe anxiety and paranoid delusions, but I knew the truth. Years of plotting murder while fearing retaliation had finally broken her mind. Dad struggled to understand how his wife had hidden such severe mental illness, never suspecting that two predators had shared his home. I visited her once, accompanied by Dad and a social worker. She sat in the common room, her hands trembling from medication rather than rage. When she saw me, Something flickered in her eyes, a moment of the old calculation, before the antipsychotics dulled it back to emptiness. She tried to speak, but the words came out jumbled, her careful plans reduced to incoherent mumbling. The doctors explained her condition to Dad while I stood silent, playing the concerned daughter one last time. They spoke of stress-induced psychosis, of delusions about poisoning and persecution. Her journals had been discovered during admission, pages of increasingly frantic documentation about insulin tampering and peanut-based murder attempts. The medical team dismissed them as elaborate fantasies, symptoms of her break from reality. I returned to campus carrying the weight of victory that felt like defeat. Mom was neutralized, but not through clever manipulation or strategic planning. Her own mind had become the final trap, paranoia consuming her from within. The inheritance would transfer to me in 2 years, but the money felt tainted by the blood we'd drawn from each other. My junior year passed in relative peace. Dad divorced Mom quietly, unable to reconcile the woman he'd loved with the disturbed individual in psychiatric care. He remarried eventually, finding happiness with someone who brought warmth back into his life. I attended the wedding, finally able to eat freely at a family gathering. The final legal documents arrived on my 21st birthday. Grandma's inheritance transferred fully into my control. Every dollar Mom had tried to cull me for now sitting in accounts she'd never touch. I donated half to allergy research and kept the rest for the therapy I'd finally admitted I needed. Mom remained institutionalized, her condition stabilizing but never fully improving. The doctors said she'd developed an elaborate internal narrative where she was the victim of a conspiracy involving poisoned insulin and stolen inheritance. They treated it as a fixed delusion, unaware that broken clocks sometimes tell the correct time. I graduated with honors, my hypervigilance transformed into academic excellence. The habits she'd forced me to develop became tools for success in unexpected ways. Attention to detail, strategic planning, the ability to maintain facades, all skills learned in our deadly dance that served me well in professional settings. Years later, I still check my food with the thoroughness she taught me through terror. I still document important interactions, maintain multiple backups of critical information, and trust sparingly. She made me into a survivor through her cruelty, though neither of us emerged from our war intact. The last time I saw her, she was sitting in the facility's garden, carefully tending plants with the same precision she'd once used to poison me. The nurses said gardening calmed her, gave her purpose. I watched from a distance as she watered roses, her movements still graceful despite the medication's effects. For a moment, I glimpsed the mother she might have been in a different life, one where Grandma's money hadn't corrupted her love into murder. I left without speaking to her. Our war finally ended not through clever schemes or mutual destruction, but through the simple erosion of her sanity. The monster who'd haunted my childhood had become a broken woman growing flowers, her elaborate plots reduced to ensuring roses received the correct amount of sunlight. The drive back to my life felt like emerging from a nightmare that had lasted 18 years. I'd survived her best efforts, built a future from the ashes of our relationship, and learned to find peace in the distance between us. The inheritance she'd culled for now funded the life she'd tried to steal, a final irony in our twisted fairy tale. I still carry an EpiPen everywhere, still read labels with obsessive care, still feel my throat tighten when I smell peanut butter. Some scars never fully heal, but I also carry the strength she inadvertently gave me, the resilience forged in surviving her love. In trying to destroy me, she'd created someone indestructible. The war was over. We'd both lost. We'd both won. And finally, mercifully, it no longer mattered which was which. Alright, that's all from me for now. Thanks for sticking around while I tried to be entertaining, haha. Drop a like on the video if you made it this far.